back, ladies and gentlemen. We are here today at episode 10 for the Intellectual Gentlemen's Club. Today we are going to be joined by Michael Nelson. But before we get into all that, I just want to say thanks for everybody that's subscribing on iTunes, on Stitcher, listening directly through our website, all across there in the cloud. People retweeting episodes and favoriting and liking, and Twitter and Facebook. It's really helping getting the word out. And just want to say thanks for everybody for listening and contributing to discussions online. It's really been a fun journey since this started. So again, just thanks for tuning in. Today we're going to be sponsored by Life. So go out there and live your life the way you want to, and not the way that you think somebody else would like you to live. Everybody's in this together, but we're all pieces of the hive. So bring your own contribution to the table and do what you like to do out there. We do have a couple of affiliate sponsors now. The newest one on board is Onnit.com. They are a total human optimization company, and we have a link directly on our website. Get some nootropics on there. They have Alpha Brain, New Mood, Shroom Tech Sport, mental enhancing products. They also are carrying exercise equipment, battle ropes, kettlebells, things like that. So if you use our link on the website, it takes you right through the portal, and anything you buy through that session, we get a little bit of a cut from it. So works out pretty good. Doesn't cost you anything else. Also, we have an affiliate sponsorship with Amazon.com. It's the same type of thing. We have a link that's right through our website, intellectualgentlemensclub.com. Go there, click on the Amazon link, and anything you already have in your wish list, and anything you purchase through that session, we're going to get a cut on that as well. It doesn't cost you guys anything additional. It just comes out of Amazon's pocket. So if you would, and you like to support us, there's also a PayPal button on there as well. You can pay right through a credit card, and just to cover the light bills and hosting and all that kind of stuff. So, but without further ado, I'm Jason Abbott. I'm your host, and today joining me again for my co-host is Toby Aylesbury. What's up, Toby?
Living the life, baby. Living the life.
All right. And Michael Nelson, he is the host and webmaster of Midwest Reel.
Webmaster. I don't know if anyone's ever called me that before.
Well, now you have. That's part of your repertoire. You throw that on your resume, Mike.
Shit, I'll do that.
But their basic tagline is Wonder, Unite, and Create. I think they started, Mike, you started this podcast a couple weeks before the IGC launched their pilot. So we kind of came up at the same time. I think we have a lot of the same type of inspirations, like Warrior Poet, London Real, Joe Rogan, to name the top dogs, I guess. And then, it's kind of went into Disinfocast and the Drunken Taoist. There's Duncan Trussell, all these guys. It's kind of like the whole Death Squad crew. It's got a really cool vibe to it, and I'm happy to support those guys. Yeah. So you also have a band, City of Ghosts.
Yes, sir.
And,
we just finished recording. Worked our asses off for a couple of weeks at a studio here in Milwaukee called 608. On the off chance there's any bands listening, definitely check out Derek at 608. He's an awesome guy. So we'll be putting that out later this year. I think October is when it'll finally drop out. It's weird. It's weird to us, actually, because we've never had a situation where we haven't been putting a record out ourselves, and we've just been able to say, oh, okay, the record's out now. There actually has to be like a review process and a distribution process and all that done. So the record's done, but we haven't even heard it yet. And yeah, so that's what's going on with that.
Growing pains.
Yeah. I can't complain, though. We're all super stoked about it.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
So your the website is midwestreel.net. You do some blogging on there as well. And I just saw that you're now a contributor to disinfo.com.
Yeah. A couple months back, we had Matt Staggs, who is the editor of disinfo.com, on our cast. And he's active in the Death Squad movement, if that's an actual cohesive thing. I mean, he works with Rogan, and obviously that being one of our huge influences, we reached out to him as well. And we're all fans of the Disinfo cast and the website, so I've just kind of been trying to take my writing a little more seriously. I have kind of a journalism background. That's what I studied in college, but I've never, it's just never been something I've really wanted to pursue because I just have no interest in writing like hard news or for a newspaper or anything like that. And I just kind of, through this whole thing, I've kind of taken a back door back into that. And, I'm like, well, maybe I should actually start going for it a little more and start writing for some other websites and some other publications and see if I can't get a little bit of a portfolio going here. So that's what I'm doing.
It's cool. It's starting a podcast kind of opens a lot of doors and opportunities. I know we've been talking to Matt as well. We're trying to line up a time for him to come on the podcast. I think he's at Comic-Con right now. Yeah. And when he gets back, we're planning on sitting down with him. So that should be interesting.
Awesome. Yeah, he's a super interesting guy. Really, really, really well informed. Like that's another cool thing about hosting a podcast. He's been doing the Disinfocast for quite a while now, and he's talked to so many interesting people. And
it's a lot of,
if you're a halfway lucid individual, which Matt's a lot more than that, he's retained a lot of interesting information. And plus he's a well-read dude. I always see really interesting books that he's reading, that he's tweeting about and stuff like that. So I'm sure you guys will have an awesome conversation for sure.
Yeah. I enjoyed your podcast with him. That's for sure.
Yeah. It was one of my favorites for sure. It was one of those things that definitely I look back on favorably now with how everything worked out. It was awesome.
Well, what do you think has been the best part of creating Midwest Real? And I guess who was your favorite guest and what part of the experience? What's been your favorite part of it?
If any of his former guests are listening, stop listening now because he doesn't want to pick favorites.
Yeah, no, it's that shitty cliche answer of like, I don't know if I really have a favorite. Right. I mean, it's just everyone is kind of a learning experience, and everyone kind of opens like another door and creates a relationship that wasn't there before. So they've all been really awesome. I really can't. I have nothing bad to say about anybody. Everyone's been really accommodating. As you guys know, sometimes technical difficulties crop up or scheduling things just don't work out. And I don't have anything negative to say about anybody that's been on the show. Everyone's been super cool, really friendly, really accommodating, really transparent. So, I really honestly can't choose a favorite. I've enjoyed all of them. But I think my favorite thing, to answer your other question, is just the opportunity to talk to these people that I never would have had the opportunity to talk to otherwise. It's like people in different parts of the country or people I would just have no way to reach out to or have anything in common with. Like, because of the podcast, it gives us a platform to talk to one another, create a little bit of a repertoire and a friendship. So that's definitely the coolest thing, in my opinion.
Yeah. That's kind of like holding up a mirror. That's kind of exactly how I feel. It's, when I initially started listening to podcasts, it was amazing to hear those different type of conversations that you're not hearing on CNN and Fox News and, your typical mass media outlets. And, you have to sit down with an hour or two with somebody. You can really get a chance to ask those deeper questions, get into the people's mind a little bit. When you're seeing like a 30-second spot on CNN, how can you possibly know anything about this person? It's
right.
It's usually just a spot for them to pimp whatever they're doing. And I think
when it's kind of a preconceived notion about like, if it's a two-sided conversation, one person will be on side left of the issue, one person will be on side right. And, it's not a discussion that can possibly yield any type of outcome, right? Enlightenment. It's something that's a predetermined stalemate, and it's just like, it's a pretty useless exercise that's outdated at this point, I think.
Well, it's the same thing that's going on with our government at this point, and you got the left and the right, but nobody's really meeting down the middle. It's very polarized, and I think society as a whole is becoming like that, unfortunately, just because that's what we have to look at. That's our world leaders. That's plotting that course for us.
Well, everybody's working off of a cue card or a teleprompter now, and that's what I like about, the Real podcasts and things like that with London Real and Midwest Real and IGC and others. People are having discussions. People are talking. Nobody's looking at a teleprompter with, 3 editors telling them what to say and how to say it and when to take a break and all that kind of stuff. And, we don't have to worry about that in this kind of medium. And that's what I like about it. And like you said, getting to talk to other people and, introducing yourself to new ideas, heaven forbid, and that kind of thing. That's, it's a great way for people to hear what other people are doing and not be force fed the crap that's on TV.
Yeah, I think what else is important is this is an uncensored environment, and we're not subject to the FCC or any type of regulations. Obviously, you can put out there whatever content you want, how offensive you want to be. I listen to a couple podcasts that are a little bit more offensive than others, obviously. So I try and walk that line depending on, what type of guests we're dealing with, if we're dropping F-bombs or whatnot. But,
Right.
if somebody is tuning in to podcast, I was listening actually to Disinfo. Matt was interviewing David Seaman and Lee Camp, and they were talking about this new generation of people that's coming up, and they're thirsty for different knowledge. And it's like a podcast community. If you're listening to podcasts like Midwest Real and IGC and Disinfo and Joe Rogan, you're thirsty for different information, or else you wouldn't be listening to those podcasts. You're just going to be listening to the same old regurgitated material that's spit out on the news every night. So I just think it's been really cool.
And that old kind of media platform doesn't lend itself to any type of pushing forward of any type of agenda or discussing anything controversial, because the last thing somebody like CNN wants to be associated with is controversy. I mean, they need to remain quote unquote objective, even though they're clearly beholden to their sponsors before everybody else. And, they don't want to generate any type of controversy around their media personalities. And when you can't be honest about what you actually believe, or, where you think society has shortcomings, you're not going to accomplish anything. You're just going to create an echo chamber, which is, what we've seen happen for the last, 15, 20 years of having this, network and like 24-hour news paradigm. It's just, one narrative is set. Everybody reports on the exact same stories. And now, with the advent of Fox News and MSNBC, it's like, we're just going to report this exact same story from the right and this exact same story from the left. So again, you just have another stalemate, and it's just like, it's never ending. It's just a never ending loop of bullshit. And that's where podcasts come in, is, we may not have the audience of a CNN, and never will, but at least there's a place you can go to not only listen to new ideas, but take part in the conversation, because there's zero barrier between us and the audience. If they want to talk to us on Twitter, Facebook, whatever, we're right there,
for sure,
willing and able to have that conversation.
What else is cool is when you have these communities that are popping up now. I mean, me and Toby were in our mid-30s, so we kind of grew up to some extent without the internet, and looking for communities, I guess, is challenging. Like, I don't, I'm a practitioner of meditation, but it's very hard for me to find people around that like meditation, that like flotation tanks, that like to experiment with their consciousness, whether it be with psychedelics or any other thing. So when you're online, there's a lot more people out there that exposes you to these other people across the country and across the globe with these different ideas. And I think it gives you a better sense of community. And I think there's something to be said with face-to-face as well. I think that that's very important. Mm-hmm. But overall, with these online communities and Facebook and Twitter, specifically like, London Reel has the Facebook group London Reelers. So a lot of people who follow the podcast get on there, and they're dropping constant ideas. It gives people a sense of belonging, I guess, and you're not alone out there, and people who think you're crazy when you start talking about, Monsanto's poisoning the world, or, NDAA is bad because they want to lock people up. Sometimes you get, Toby, you said it before, that deer in the headlights look.
Yeah.
And when you're around these other people in these communities, it gives you a sense of, maybe I'm not fucking crazy. Maybe other people out there are thinking the same thing. So, with me running the Facebook page, I kind of use that as like a funnel. So take positive information and just kind of whittle it down and give it to, subscribers of the page and whatnot. And it feels good to be able to put out there things that I know are going to be more honest than, I guess, other things that I could be putting on there. So it's an interesting ride with how that all works with social media.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Is you have those communities that never would have otherwise cropped up. It's not like there was never a situation even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, where you could create a community around something like this that wasn't local. You had to have that face-to-face relationship going. I mean, even if it was something like a more crude type of internet, the infrastructure wasn't there. There wasn't really a good way to gather or to get to know people or share data fast enough. And now we're just in a place where it's just unbelievable, and it's like almost to the point where we're oversaturated with good information if you know where to look for it.
Yeah.
And that's a really good problem to have. I mean, I don't even know if that's a first world problem. That's like a future problem.
Right. I mean, it is difficult sometimes, but if you have, all these different sources now, it's, I don't know how many podcasts I subscribe to, and it's just impossible to get to all of them at this point. Every time I see something new that pops up there and I give a subscription, something like that, it's impossible to keep up. I took a road trip a couple days ago and just gobbled up probably 15 different podcasts, and it feels good when I'm able to take a drive like that and just kick back and, be Johnny Five, input, but
yeah.
There's, it's almost too much to take in sometimes. You're right.
Yeah. And like I said, I think that's a tremendously good problem to have. It's like that idea where, that whole paradigm of needing to wait for the next episode or the next thing or whatever, obviously that still applies to a lot of, if you're into watching like Breaking Bad or like Game of Thrones, like, yeah, you need to wait for that kind of shit. But when it comes to podcasts, there's no reason to ever not have 50 in the queue waiting.
Sure.
There's just so many good ones out there.
Yeah. And, sometimes you'll get a hold of one and you'll give it, 15, 20 minutes and it's not for you, and that's fine. And that's, I think if people tune into ours, that's the same way I feel. If it's for you, great. If it's not, move on to the next one and just, feed your brain with something good. I mean, that's basically what it boils down to for me.
Yeah, totally.
So why don't you give us a little background about City of Ghosts? I know that you started Midwest Real with one of your other band members, and a couple of the other guys have a couple novellas. But recently you've introduced some new co-hosts and things like that. How's everything going with the other guys?
So to answer your first question, City of Ghosts was something that was going on prior to me being involved with it. I was living in Japan. Two guys I used to play music with joined City of Ghosts, and it just kind of so happened that when I came back from Japan, they were needing another member because one of the guys got a job out in the Bay Area. So it was just kind of the most logical thing for me to just hook back up with them. I was already familiar with playing that type of music, and it's worked out awesome. Like over the last year, we've written a whole bunch of songs, whittled it down to this record that's coming out in October on Easy Killer Records. So that's been awesome. We're really excited to see what happens with it, and we're hoping it creates some opportunities for us to just kind of, spread it as far and wide as possible. And as far as Midwest Real goes, the genesis of that was kind of just really organic. Like, I've always enjoyed having kind of philosophical conversations, and, inevitably, if I was catching up with somebody, it would just always go in that direction. And I started listening to Rogan and Trussell, guys like that a couple of years back. And in the back of my mind, I always knew, I'm like, I really want to do something like this, but I just, I don't really have a platform for it. And why would anybody listen to me?
Know the feeling.
And Shane and my band just kind of, just naturally brought it up to me one day. He's like, hey, would you ever want to just start a podcast? And I was like, you know what, man, I really, really do want to start a podcast. So we just kind of started laying the groundwork and figuring out what we need to do. And I hooked up with a couple other friends, Dana and Handsome, and we really started doing the work and figuring out what we need to do to make it happen. And we just kind of put it out there, and people latched onto it, luckily. So it's been, it's been really cool, and I'm definitely going to keep going with it.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely takes a lot of work, but the benefits have way outweighed what you go through to get it produced, and with contacting people and lining everything up and scheduling, things like that. But when you get that finished product out and you're proud of it, it's a really cool thing. Speaking of City Ghosts, do you guys still have that EP on Bandcamp out?
We do, yeah.
Still available?
A while ago, it was free for the longest time, and we wanted to keep it free, but we're putting so much money of our own money just into the band that it was just kind of like, man, this thing's been free for over a year now.
Yeah.
Let's just put it up to $2 now
right?
and try to make ends meet a little more. So, but yeah, it's still available on Bandcamp, cityofghostband.bandcamp.com. You can listen to the whole thing for free before you buy it. So
how would you classify the band? Like hard rock?
Yeah, for the tens of our listeners who aren't familiar with your music, how would you describe the sound?
Yeah, it's like heavier indie rock, kind of. I don't really know. I guess people have called it like post-hardcore. It's kind of like a little bit like spacey sounding, a little bit progressive, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I don't like to try to
box it in
the music into a genre just because I feel like it just sounds contrived no matter what I say. So right. I guess I'll just let people decide that for themselves.
I enjoyed it. I spent an afternoon listening to it, and you push it out on the podcast. So one day I'm like, I'm just going to check this out. And
awesome.
I liked it, man. I listened to the whole thing all the way through, and I was pretty impressed.
Thanks,
it's nice work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm really looking forward to sharing the new stuff because I think it's definitely a step up. And I can't even take any credit for the old stuff because, like I said, it was before I was even in the band. So yeah, let me know what you think of the new stuff.
Cool. Will do. You mentioned that you spent some time living in Japan. How long were you over there, and could you explain how different the culture really is in Japan versus the United States?
Is it at all like we imagine, where it's samurai culture and people are bowing and buying
and geishas?
Yeah, and buying lots of kitty, things with cat faces on them and all that kind of stuff.
Yes and no. Like a lot of the stereotypes are painfully true.
Really?
You definitely have a very, very homogenized culture. Like almost everybody who lives in that country is Japanese. And if you're a foreigner, it's very much, you have the feeling of, wow, I am a foreigner here. And it's not because people aren't friendly or unaccommodating. It's just purely by the fact that almost everyone is Japanese and it's not very convenient to be a foreigner there. It's like,
what do you mean by convenient? It's not convenient.
Like language,
just little things like, I need to go to the bank today, and they're just very unwilling to try to cater to Westerners in that way. Like if you're a tourist there, everything you're going to need is going to be in English. All the train stations, everything in the airports, everything in all the common shopping and tourist destinations. But when it comes to actually living there, there's this huge divide where it's very difficult to really assimilate into the culture. And to answer your question, I was there for just over a year. And just, you're constantly hearing like people referring to the fact that you're a foreigner in Japanese. They'll be kind of like talking about you and like just kind of drawing attention to you and kind of like pointing and oohing and eyeing and stuff like that.
So it's not a negative type feel. It's almost like look at this exotic individual. This is an American or something like that. Okay.
Yeah, it's really not malicious in any way, but it's kind of like being
a zoo exhibit or something,
celebrity or something.
So did you get any special treatment over there? Like, I don't know, anybody invite you over to dinner, or does that stuff happen? Or because I imagine Japan to be like everybody kind of keeps their head down and there's not like a lot of communication. I work in a building where we have Japanese language school, so there's a lot of people in and out of here, and usually they don't make eye contact at all. Like I usually try and make eye contact with people and give them a smile. How you doing? Things like that. But generally they don't like look up. It's just kind of like I'm in my own business. And I don't know if that's just for the fact that I'm Japanese. I'm here in America, and I just I don't know the culture or whatnot. But it just seems like it's such a divide.
There's definitely a sense of solitary, like remaining a solitary person while being in a very crowded situation is kind of the norm there because everybody's just so crammed together, whether you're on like a train or, you know, in like a shopping area or whatever. It's just really common to be in close proximity to a lot of other people. And I think people kind of have learned to remain very private, all while being very close to others.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you're in a social situation where there's like a work relationship, you're definitely going to get invited out all the time. People are going to want to drink with you. People are going to expect you to make a pretty big social effort. It's absolutely expected. Like if you never hung out with your coworkers and never went out and never got drunk, never got dinner with them, it would be extremely strange for them.
I gotcha. Oh, one of my
Yeah, so
questions, I don't know if you had any experience with this over there, but the sexuality behind Asian culture, specifically Japan, you notice if you frequent the porn world at all that some of the Japanese porn can be quite twisted, and from what I gather, just about looking on what happens in Japan, there's almost a sense of sexual repression there. Like you don't see a lot of public display of affection, or there's not really a lot of publicized stuff about sex. Am I right about
everything's
that?
not as sexed up as it is in the States,
Right.
I guess. Yeah.
But
It's kind of the feeling.
is it take on that twist with the repression, or is it just something that's really not as people don't concern themselves with enough, which I don't buy because everybody wants to fuck. But
It's weird because it's one of those things where it's very pervasive, and like you'll see ads for massage parlors or like places where it's known that you can get sexually pleasured all over the place. Like it's not hidden at all,
okay,
and it is legal, but at the same time it's kind of like everything has its appropriate place. So people don't just really outwardly talk about that. It's definitely a taboo to just start talking about it, but it's also very out in the open. So it's kind of like paradoxical in that way. It's very strange. But yeah, they do have a very, highly sexualized culture in a lot of ways, and they have like a very booming sex industry. There's no doubt about it. And I think it's kind of like there's less of a stigma surrounding it, but it's kind of like that's your private thing. You just don't talk about it. But I was over there with my girlfriend, so I wasn't going on any adventures in that respect.
You weren't frequenting any massage parlors or whatnot.
Yeah, and I've
So
heard
there's
a lot
not
of
any-
them aren't friendly to foreigners as well. So I really can't speak to that. But
Sure.
maybe if anybody's listening to this that's lived in Japan for longer than I have, you can dig up some dirt on that.
So is there a moral issue with sex like there is in the States with our Puritan background and values and hush hush and backdoor and all that kind of stuff, or is it
Backdoor.
well
What?
Ooh,
know,
hey,
not
Yeah,
that's
I
not
don't-
how I meant
I
it,
don't
but
think
I
it's-
know.
I don't really think there's as much of a religious taboo surrounding it. I think it's a lot more of, like I said, a social thing where you bring it up in the appropriate situation and it has its time and place and it's kind of your private matter.
okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, at least that's how I view it. I mean, you'll definitely see the token dirty old man looking at porn on the train, there's a word just for going out and harassing girls called nampa. Like it'll be something people will say, well, yeah, we're going to go out and do nampa, where it's basically like you just go out and hit on girls.
I guess we kind of do that here as well.
Yeah, it's weird because
We call
it's like
that getting
everything
out of
Japan
bed.
is- What's that?
I said we call that getting out of bed.
Yeah, it's like everything over there seems to be very like I guess categorized and planned for. It's just kind of like now we're gonna go nampa, and it's like okay, that's like almost like it's scheduled. Like from 10 to 10:30, we're going to nampa, and then we're gonna go drink or something. It's everything is just very
Pretty
like
rigid,
concrete.
right? Is it real rigid? You mean?
Yeah, it's pretty rigid. There was definitely a lot of experiences I had where people were talking about making plans in the future, and it would be like, so we're going to meet for lunch a month and a half from now at 12:15 by such and such entrance at the train station, right? And there's like, yep, sounds good, and people would write it in their little books, and that's what they would do.
So there's
Yeah,
not a lot of. I'm just trying to think of in the States, a lot of people kind of do things on the seat of their pants, and they don't really plan for, they just kind of, oh, let's just go out. I don't know. What do you want to do? I don't know. So everything's
Yeah, like
pretty much
less
planned out
impulsive.
there, and people kind of have a control basic issue or something like that.
And I think everybody works so much and so hard over there that it's almost like if you do want to make social plans, you really do need to be a lot more meticulous with your time to make it work. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. It's just if you're working 60, 70 hours a week overtime, and not to mention, it's not as much of a driving culture. Everybody takes public transportation, so they know exactly what time their train comes and, when they're going to arrive, and it just goes like clockwork, and people are really used to that and thrive off that over there.
How was the public transportation? How was the trains and things like that, the super fast and all that high speed train thing that they've got going over there?
Yeah, it's great. All their public transportation is super reliable, very clean. The only complaint is it's not cheap. Like they're a really highly educated culture, and everybody has a job more or less. So it's not cheap to travel around the country. There's just no cheap way to get from point A to point B. Even if you're gonna go the cheapest possible route, you're gonna pay a decent amount of money. So
unemployment not a big deal there.
yeah, that I would say is actually one of the things that's more repressed, like the kind of suppressed population of the unemployed and the poor is one of those things that is a huge societal problem. You'll just see kind of these there'll be these really well organized communities of homeless people where they'll all live in a certain area, and they kind of set up kind of a nice situation that they have going. It's kind of interesting. It's one of those things that they definitely don't draw attention to, but they also just don't interfere with it.
So if it works, just leave them alone, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's almost like that's their business. We're not going to get involved.
Well, and if they're
vibe.
organized and they're not hurting anybody, and they're keeping to themselves and keeping clean and following the law, I guess what are you going to do?
Right.
Yeah. It's kind of like if you fall off the well-traveled path there, it's pretty easy to find yourself in a situation where you're not going to get any more chances. And I think they may just look at those type of people as, oh, they failed, and they're reaping what they've sown now, and they're just kind of
Just
in
an
that part of
apathetic
society, and they're stuck there.
Isn't there also like a huge suicide problem though among the young people in Japan? And
Or is that China?
I thought it was Japan.
No, it is
where
Japan.
The pressure
You're
is so
definitely
big
right.
with school and then getting into the right firm and continuing your education and that kind of thing. If they don't meet those expectations, then they typically just game over and punch out. I'm wondering,
100%.
yeah,
You're right.
if if the homeless population, and I'm not saying they should go out and kill themselves, but I'm wondering, what make, and I'm not saying you necessarily have the answer to this, but I'm wondering how somebody makes distinguish how they distinguish which they should do. All right, am I going to go the homeless route or am I going to go the suicide route? And because I thought, for some reason I had this picture in my head that just wasn't really an option in Japan, and I've never been there, so I don't really know, but that you either made it or you didn't, and if you didn't, then you punched out.
Well, I wonder if that goes back to like the samurai culture, because if they lost a battle, what is it called, seppuku or something like that, where you wouldn't want
There's
to.
a few different names for it. Yeah,
You wouldn't want to
Harakiri,
fail. You'd rather
seppuku.
take your life than go down in defeat or something like that. And I wonder if that has just hung around through the ages.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a different societal feeling toward suicide. It's still definitely stigmatized. It's not one of those things that, is encouraged or is really regular or looked at like, oh, no big deal. It's definitely something that they acknowledge as a societal problem. And I think a huge reason for that is individuality and creativity is really stifled. Like you said, it's very important to get into the right school, get into the right company, do well for your family, and if you fall off that track, it really is looked at poorly on your character and on your family's character. So I think that's a huge reason for a lot of the suicide. But I taught English over there, and I would see kids in middle school, like struggling with their academics and really trying hard to get into a good high school. And I mean, these are like 13-year-old kids that are just, going to school, studying day and night. It's pretty crazy. It's very different than over here.
Yeah, I mean, growing up, you always heard about the educational system, like, oh well, we have to do much better because Japan, they're more on the up and up with education and things like that. It was always like a competition from when I heard, like when I was going through, primary education. It was like, well, the Japanese are going to school 7 days a week. They go to school year round. There's so much pressure over there to compete global scale. The huge United States, Japan over there is back in the 80s when, they were on the front of the electronic age. Companies like Sony and Samsung, these are all high-tech companies. So I'm sure that they have to, they got to fill the ranks. So, they want people to work hard. And I just think there's probably so much more than in the world than there needs to be. When you're talking about capitalism, there's so much pressure to be able to, to be on top, to be the baller. Everybody, wants, they want it all. But I think there really needs to be a pushback from that, because people are people and they're not robots. When you put a kid in school, especially some of these smaller kids, man, like I have two kids, 8 and 12. And if they were going to school like 6 days a week, year round, I can't even imagine what that would do to them. I mean, they're still kids. They got to play. I don't understand. I understand that they want to compete in the global economy, but they might be doing a lot more damage than they realize. And, if there's a really high suicide rate like that, that kind of shows, something, at least, I would imagine.
Yeah, and I think there's obviously a shift happening. I don't think you can, you can't. Yes, we think about the more extreme revolutions like the Arab Spring type situations and the upheaval in Brazil and Spain and all that stuff. And while what's happening in Japan isn't as extreme as all of that, there's definitely this kind of sense among the millennials and the Generation Y people that, they're not really satisfied by that well-traveled path anymore. And there's definitely a lot more interest in, traveling the world, being creative, being an individual. And you see that a lot more in the cities for sure, like especially in Tokyo. Like that's, such a vibrant city, really varied, all kinds of crazy subcultures. But it's kind of funny because even some of those are just like really derivative of other subcultures or like what they think other subcultures are. So it's always wrapped in kind of satire over there. It's interesting.
When you're over there, what was the biggest challenge you had to overcome over there? Was it primarily the language?
The language barrier is definitely something that is there. I mean, you're pretty limited in what you can do if you can't speak any Japanese. Like I said, it's not too hard to go travel and, book a hotel and do stuff like that. But if you do want to explore more and you want to live there, there's definitely times where you're going to be filling out forms or, asking for directions, and you're just going to get really frustrated. And I think, a lot of it revolves around living there, because things that you're just inevitably going to need to do, like go to the doctor or go to the dentist or whatever, like that's going to require help unless you have a really high level of Japanese proficiency. So, I mean, maybe that's kind of a general answer for living abroad, but, with the writing system being so different as well, you can't really just take educated guesses or something like that.
A lot different than Spanish, right? Yeah. So when you're over there, what is the sentiment with the people in the government over there? Is it like obey all, or do they have sentiments like we do over here in the United States where a lot of people question the authority? How does that all seem to work over there?
Yeah, like it's interesting because there's a lot of distrust in the government, especially in the wake of the tsunami and what happened in March of 2011.
Right.
There's a lot. Everybody knows about kind of how the government lied about the extent of the damage and wasn't releasing details on the radioactive leakage and stuff like that. And it's kind of funny, they're always electing a new prime minister. They've gone through an insane amount of prime ministers in the last 10 years. I can't even guess,
never
like
happy with
20,
them, right?
15 different ones or something.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, there's not a lot of demonstration or, gathering. That's definitely looked at with a lot of skepticism or a lot of like, why are you doing this? This is unsightly type thing. So it's not really encouraged to do mass demonstrations at all. So the way that they protest is kind of more passively, I think, and a lot more by voting and stuff like that.
Okay. In the United States, people, well, the circles that I've been traveling in lately, they have, there's a lot of people that don't trust our government at all. As far as you could throw the whole lot of them. You have things coming out now like the NDAA, that, the National Defense Authorization Act. That's been, probably 6 months ago that was enacted, right?
Yeah.
And now PRISM just broke. This is probably about a month ago. We haven't dropped the podcast since that all happened. But well, let's dive into those issues a little bit. What do you think about PRISM? What do you think about NDAA?
Yeah, it's like on one hand, it doesn't shock me, like the idea that there's an insane amount of surveillance happening that we don't know about. It really didn't come as too much of a shock to me. I think how like grandiose it was, a lot of those documents that were leaked, that was kind of surprising. It almost seemed like a joke or something when I first saw it. But I'm not surprised. And if I were trying to play devil's advocate to the whole being suspicious of the government thing, I would say, well, put yourself in their shoes, and if you're trying to prevent deaths, wouldn't it be easy to justify all this surveillance? But I mean, clearly, as somebody who's having their privacy raped on a regular basis, it's a lot harder to
Swallow.
really resonate with that kind of an outlook. And I think that's kind of the problem is what we want doesn't necessarily align with what the government wants. And that's not going to change no matter who's in power, especially when you have the current breakdown of power that we have, with the Senate and with the executive branch and all these like, various branches of legislature. You're never going to be properly looking after the rights of the people anymore until we get to something that's a lot more direct. And it doesn't seem like that's going to be happening anytime soon. So I think it's just going to get worse, quite frankly. I mean, people already distrust Congress. They, everybody's painfully aware of super PACs and, campaign finance reform isn't happening. So I don't know, man. I mean, on one hand, I wouldn't be surprised if revolution broke out, but on the other hand, I think we're way too fat and appeased right now to really get off of our asses and do anything.
Well, the bit about PRISM and the government spying on Americans, the thing that a lot of people don't know, and I'm not even sure if they should know, but in order to spy on Americans, whatever government agency wants to do that has to get permission from the Attorney General. That's kind of where the buck stops. And so,
But this overrides all that, doesn't
Mr.
it?
Holder, no.
PRISM,
any government agency that wants to look into the knickers of another American has to have the Attorney General's permission.
Okay.
I know that from what I used to do.
Sure.
So if people are doing it and the government is doing it, and when they find out about it and it breaks and nobody's getting fired, it's because Eric Holder knew it was happening and his predecessor knew it was happening. So this is no surprise to the government. They got caught with their pants down and they're handing the cookie jar, but
well, and this is what I'm kind of leading into is you have these people that are privy to this type of information with classified information. Specific, I'm talking about Edward Snowden right now, but you have Bradley Manning, you have Julian Assange, these people that are quote unquote whistleblowers, bringing this information to light. And I'm not talking about somebody releasing the knock list, obviously like, with CIA operatives and things like that. But isn't this some information that people should probably know a little bit, that they're compiling every email that you send, every text message that you send, every phone call, any electronic piece of information is being stored in the desert and, outside of Salt Lake, at this massive facility. just in case, you're tagged in some kind of terrorist flag. They can just go through your entire life and dismantle everything. And I just don't understand why there's not more people that are pissed off about this and like up in arms. And I understand what you're talking about. We're too fattened up. We're appeased, Toby, we talked about it before. We got our NFL.
That's
we got
right,
our American
man.
Idol.
We're getting our government cheese, and everybody's happy.
Yeah, well, I'm not happy with it. I live a fairly regular life in the suburbs, and just by looking at the way I operate my life, you probably wouldn't think that I operate a podcast like this or talk about, issues like this and put them out there for everybody to listen to. But I'm very surprised that people just don't give a shit. Like, well, if you're not doing anything, you have nothing to hide. Well, every American every day breaks laws, and it could be as simple as running a stoplight. It could be as simple as speeding or whatever it's going to be. And when you're pulling through things like that, and somebody can just look and pick and choose what they want to charge you with, they can find something. Almost probably a felony is committed by every American every day to some degree. There's a lot of people who are squeaky clean out there, but a lot of people do have something to hide. And I don't feel that it's right that, and another problem about the government is there's not really a government. You have all these different government agencies that don't even necessarily talk to each other. Is the FBI talking to the CIA? Maybe, maybe not. Is anybody talking to the NSA? Probably not. They have this gigantic budget where nothing's capped. They don't have to talk about what they're doing. They don't have to reconcile anything.
Well, that's the thing. Those are our tax dollars paying for this. I mean, we are basically paying the government to spy on us, and that's the part that pisses me off. Is when we got, unemployment in double digits, and we've got people that can't afford an education, and we've got kids going to piss poor schools, but we have time and money to put all of this in place. It's like, come on, guys, this isn't cheap stuff.
Yeah. Plus, we got the war going on top of this. It's got its own ramifications with stuff. Yeah, there's so much money. It's also kind of funny that.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's also kind of funny that the parts of the government that require more of our money are the most opaque organizations, like the places we have the least idea what they're doing and what's going on. It's just kind of like, oh no, trust me, they need your money more than anyone else, and it's for your own safety. You're going to get blown up if you don't fund these institutions. And it's like, we can't even make that choice for ourselves if it's really worth it. It's just, we don't have a say in the matter. We just go further and further into debt as a nation and as individuals, and we just keep pumping the money in.
Yeah, that doesn't work. I studied economics, and you don't have to be an economic brain trust to know that when you spend more than you have coming in, eventually you're going to run out of money, and people are going to stop giving you money.
That's all right. We'll just print more. Fuck it.
Yeah. We just keep printing and just keep pushing that button, and that's what we've been doing, and eventually the house of cards falls in on itself.
It's inevitable that we're going to run into some type of destruction on our economy. I mean, it's built on exponential growth, and everybody knows that you can't grow forever. There's going to be a point where things kind of level off. Like, what happens when you don't produce any more jobs? We've already seen what that happens. There's the Great Recession. People call it a recession. Was it a depression? That's kind of how I look at it. Was it as bad? No, the numbers don't say they were, but why would they?
Well, they doctored the numbers. I mean, if we looked at it the same way that we did in the 30s and 40s, we would have been in a massive depression. But they changed a few things around. They took out some, unemployment numbers and moved them over here and took people out after, 18 months and said, oh, well, now they're not unemployed. They're just, off the grid as far as jobs are concerned.
They don't count. Right?
Yeah, they just don't count anymore.
Not to mention, I mean, what about people who are doing jobs that they're far overqualified for? We have such a huge amount of college graduates going into jobs that are so far beneath them,
and they're so full of debt.
And that's not factored at all into the unemployment numbers. It's like, how many people have bachelor's or master's degrees and they're working at a job where they're making like $12 an hour? Mm-hmm. And it's just, that's not doing anybody justice. That's not good for the country, because we don't have the smart people in the positions they're supposed to be in. We don't even have a place for them to go, because they don't have the skills that they actually need to make a difference or push technology forward. It's just like, we live in this system where we all expect we're going to have a job where we're making a comfortable living, and that's what we've been promised our whole lives. It's like if you go get a liberal arts degree, you're going to be making a comfortable living, you're going to be able to own a nice home, have a family, be comfortable, be fat, and you'll live happily ever after. Well, that's not really possible anymore. So it's like, what do we do from here? It's like we either need to develop a skill or we need to do a job that's far beneath us. And I think our generation is having a very rude awakening because of that.
Well, I think there's another school of thought out there that, a lot of people thought that technology was going to save everything. And our technology is, if you look at 10 years ago, okay, just remove smartphones from every equation. You didn't have Google at your fingertips. Everybody in society, mostly now, okay, anybody who's got a smartphone has the entirety of human information at their fingertips at any given point in time. I upgraded my phone. Now I can just talk to my phone and ask a question, and it'll tell me anything I need to know. I don't even have to type it in anymore. So is there a piece of technology that could help elevate us from our dire pressures that we're having now, or is it just going to create more of the same environment?
I think that's a difficult question to answer, but I actually think that the answer could be yes, because right now we're in this weird spot where we have this unprecedented access to information, but you can't eat that information or manifest that information into something physical or a tool that you can actually do any good with.
We're getting close though, right?
Exactly.
3D
yeah. With 3D printing and fabrication, and all these like kind of new super materials that are being manufactured like graphene, we're going to be able to do things that sound like total science fiction within the next 20 years. I mean, you're going to have like they're calling it the third wave of the third technological revolution, where you're actually going to be able to have an internet of things. Like you're going to be able to physically manifest things, and that's going to change things a lot.
Mm-hmm. I can say where that would definitely serve a major purpose, but I'm just curious if it is going to help things or if it's going to make things worse. Are we going to be more appeased so the government can strip away more rights piece by piece? Or is it going to help us overcome some of these great challenges in the government? I know when you guys were having one of your housecasts on Midwest Real, you guys were talking about the future of government and possibly some type of directocracy, where I thought I hadn't even heard of that before, but it's almost like an individual vote on the internet, removing representatives and senators and things like that, and just everybody contribute on their own. I think that's a problem now because not everybody has access to the internet or even a device that would do that. But as time goes on, the next 20 years, there's not going to be hardly anybody out there that doesn't have a way to connect to the internet. Well, how can we change the government? Is that going to change, or are we stuck with the same old song and dance with people lying in their pockets and lobbyists?
I think they're gonna ride the rocket straight into the fucking land, and it explodes. I mean, I think they're just going to hold on to that paradigm with just white knuckle it all the way through until it just doesn't work anymore. And I think rather than like violent revolution, what that's actually going to look like is an implosion of the economy. And I think nobody's really going to care, because 25 years down the line, when you can just make whatever you want in your own home, who needs large manufacturing, or who needs, the economy to do well anymore? You can just make what you need and you can live off of that. And if we really get to that point, we don't need some giant economy to push things forward anymore, or to, line the pockets of the president and, the legislature. It's like, we'll just live off of our own devices, and we don't need money for that. We'll need supplies, and we'll need whatever it takes to fuel our replicators, I guess. But that's all we're going to need, really.
But we operate on scarcity right now instead of abundance, and that's
Exactly.
part of like the whole zeitgeist movement is going away from a monetary system and going to what's it called?
A resource-based economy.
Resource-based economy. Yeah.
But if you've got an internet, catalog of everything that you could ever want, and all you got to do is push a button and it's going to print out, we're going to run out of resources. We're working with a finite planet, and
Sure.
And like Mike said, we'll be done with money at that point, because otherwise you just keep replicating money.
Mm-hmm.
But when that happens, we're gonna end up running out of material to keep building stuff, and we're just gonna have a giant landfill. It's gonna look like Wall-E. That's what we're gonna end up. We're gonna end up a bunch of fat blobs on a spacecraft waiting for the Earth to heal itself.
That's a serious risk. I totally agree. And I know this probably sounds like futurist conjecture to a lot of people, but I'm not just making this up. Like, you should look up Neil Gershenfeld from MIT. He runs the Center for Bits and Atoms, and he created what's called a Fab Lab.
Yep.
And it's kind of a cocktail of technologies, including 3D printing and fabrication. And one of his classes is how to make almost anything. And he's been doing this for quite a while now, and these technologies have been coming down in price over the last decade. And we're getting to the point now where 3D printers and laser cutters and stuff like that are getting closer and closer to something that people really will be able to afford. They're getting smaller in size, and they're already figuring out how molecular printing is going to work. And I mentioned graphene before. Graphene is something that
superconductor,
you can
right?
make in your own home, and it's can be used for practically anything you can imagine. It can be used to strengthen things. It's stronger than diamond. It's totally flexible. It's only 1 atom thin. It's a superconductor. It's absolutely insane, and it's totally biodegradable as well.
Yeah, we'll probably be digging through our garbage mounds at some point for rare earth metals, and people are throwing out motherboards and laptops and computers like it's a fucking piece of paper now. I used to work in people's homes and work on set-top boxes for the cable industry, and I always wondered, well, this receiver's coming out. Where the fuck is it going? Yeah, well, we remanufacture it. Okay, well, you're only remanufacturing it so many times before it's a worthless piece of antiquated equipment. Where are you going to do with it? And then I heard, we send it to Mexico. We send it to third world countries and things like that. Bullshit. They are not using stuff like that. So all that stuff is getting buried in these landfills, right? And we keep mining shit out of the ground. We keep cutting trees down. Keep mining, the earth for fossil fuels. That shit's not sustainable. I mean, you want to talk about the implications of climate change, things like that, and some people don't even believe it exists. I mean, all you have to do is look at the weather patterns recently, over the last few years. I don't see how anybody can refute what's happening. And yeah, does climate change? Yeah. But do I think that man has accelerated that? Absolutely. And in the United States, we're coming into our own with renewable energy and things like that. That's largely getting pushed down from the energy cartels. But when you look at China, they're not putting restrictions on things. They're not doing that in India. Watching Vice last night on an episode of the oil pirating that's going on in, where was it? Niger? Yeah, Niger. And these people are tapping into the Shell pipeline that rolls through the country illegally. They pull this crude oil out of the ground. They pump it in their boat where they're standing barefoot. And then they just light the fucker on fire for sabotage. And that's going on everywhere. So it's not just what the energy companies are doing. It's whoever's hacking into it, what people are doing with that said energy. You're on the freeway, I-75 in a lockdown. Everybody's got exhaust coming out. There's diesel particulates hitting in the air. And there's all kinds of shit that's just, we're poisoning the planet. And I don't think people understand really what we're doing. I think a lot of people have the attitude well, we can't kill the planet. It's too fucking big. Well, you get enough of us. There's almost 7 billion people on the planet.
Death by 1,000 cuts, right?
Yeah. Everybody's putting their piece at it. And, I'm to blame too. I charge 4 iDevices in the house. I have a laptop. I have computers, things like that, TVs, a refrigerator. I pull a lot of power off the grid. I'm not going to lie about that shit. But I try to be conscious about where that power's coming from. Do I really need this light to be on? Do I really need this right now? So, I mean, there's things that you can do, but I think generally the way that we live in the United States is definitely unsustainable.
Yeah, and I don't think it's really all our fault either. It's what is the responsible choice that you can make to just not use these devices and go off the grid? I mean, I don't really think that's the best way to make a difference either.
Everybody can't go off the grid.
The problem lies in this idea that you're talking about, this philosophy, this social philosophy of operating from a point of scarcity and operating from a point where we have limited resources. And once those limited resources are gone, then we're completely fucked. That's the problem right there. And the problem is that's how, if you look at the Fortune 500, ExxonMobil is continually at the top of that, pyramid. And when you're making $8 billion per quarter, no amount of, government incentive or, social leanings or what people want is going to change that. It's going to have to be a tremendous pressure from all sides for them to even change a fraction of what they're doing.
What's funny is I was really pissed off about the oil spill that happened in the Gulf. This is 2 years ago now? The BP oil spill.
It was 2009, 2010, something like that.
So, I mean, it leaked for months, unchecked. Just this massive spill. And yes, there was a loss of life on the rig and all that, and it's terrible. I'm talking largely about the environmental effects. And BP didn't skip a beat. They dropped their CEO at the time or whatnot, moved on to the next guy, passed the buck. They received all these profits, and then they're paying out for some of these fishermen boats that are cleaning up some of the oil. They can't shrimp anymore ever. They can't catch these fish anymore ever. But they put out, all this, the long-term effects are something that the American taxpayer is going to have to pay for. This isn't something that BP is going to pay for everything. Fuck you, they're going to pay for everything. How do you pay for something that's been damaged in the ecosystem hundreds of years? It's wiped out, countless miles of coastline, and you hear about these dead zones now, that these columns of nothingness, the nothing pours through the Gulf of Mexico now. How are you going to fix that? You can't fix it. Just like the Valdez oil spill, that place is still fucking nuked up there. And then you look at Fukushima, this thing is still leaking massive radiation unchecked. Nobody can see the radiation unless you have a Geiger counter, so it's not like people are really concerned with it. How are you going to stop that? You can't.
Well, what about the island of floating crap in the Pacific? Have you guys heard about that?
Is this from the
the
tsunami?
The garbage patch, where it's an island now. It's the size of almost frickin' Texas, where all of this plastic and crap and chemical junk that has
from
congealed
Japan or
together from everywhere. It's
Right.
just gathered together, and it just started coagulating and grabbing onto each other, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and now it's the size of freaking Texas, and it's floating around in the Pacific. You can see it, from space. It's freaking big, and this is what we've created.
There's detectable levels of plastic just in the ocean water too. I mean, that gets into all of our seafood, that gets into everything we consume. It's it's a tremendous problem that we have no idea how to even begin to
just
address.
Slowly poisoning ourselves. I mean, you watch these survival shows, whether it be Bear Grylls or Les Stroud or, the new ones that are out Naked and Afraid, which is actually pretty cool. But, everywhere they go, there's signs of litter. Just comes in off the shoreline, falls off a boat somewhere in the Atlantic, and this floating bottle ends up somewhere in Peru on some coastline or something. You see all the animals that are affected by it, and it's just a tragedy. It just hurts to see that there's so much profit, with energy companies and, all these major corporations, but, really nobody's taking responsibility for the negative side effects of said businesses. And they're not held responsible because they're buying off our officials that are supposed to be keeping that in check. Our officials that they're supposed to be working for us, our representatives, our senators, our president, they don't represent us. I mean, you have to come to terms with that, because when people are lining pockets and it's a political game all the time, or I got to get in office the next 4 years, I don't want to join regular society. I think a lot of people get into politics for good reasons, but it just ends up a wash. You probably get to Washington and realize this is too big to fix. You end up like JFK or whatnot.
And look at the shitstorm that people have to go through just to try to do little things like banning plastic bags or, banning PET bottles. It's like a huge political shitstorm, and it becomes this issue of personal rights. Like, libertarian people always get up in arms like, well, if I want to use this kind of container or I want to drink this giant soda, I should be able to do that even if it's bad for me. And it's like, well, yes, but it's also bad for the world because
right.
how are those bottles made? They're made from oil. Who makes money off of that? The oil companies. And it creates more, waste. And if we wanted to create legislation to just say no more PET bottles, it would make a tremendous difference. But right now, there's way too much money being made off of the fact that it's made by oil derivatives.
See, that's the problem. The common denominator here, if you pay attention, is money. That's the problem. If we got rid of money, heaven forbid, a lot of these problems would go away. I mean, kids aren't dying in Africa because there isn't enough medicine. It's because they don't have the money to pay for it. People aren't, going hungry in the United States and everywhere else in the world because there's not enough food. People, grocery stores are throwing away food every day when it
Restaurants,
expires.
All that. I remember working at Boston Chicken, man.
Yeah.
We used to have to throw out food. I even, this is crazy. I'll just take you guys back real quick, just a backdrop. Me and Toby used to work at Boston Chicken before
Chicken cutter cutting up some chicken.
Before it became Boston Market. But when we used to clean out at the end of the night, you would have this gigantic garbage bag and you would weigh the food for how much you wasted and you throw it in a fucking garbage can. And I asked my manager at the time, and I'm like 16 years old, why don't we take this food to a food bank downtown? Well, we can't do that because if somebody chokes on the food, we're liable. So these people are fucking starving because you're worried about a fucking lawsuit if somebody's choking on a piece of mac and cheese.
Well, did you see what just happened in New York? Mayor Bloomberg just made it illegal for people to donate food to the homeless because they cannot track the salt, fat, and fiber content of the food.
It's a disgrace.
So now homeless people are going to be going hungrier, even though there are people who want to help and have the means to help, but now it's against the law.
See, and that's the thing. I don't like to give homeless people money. I don't know where that fucking money's going. But if I've got some extra food, I'll give it up. Granola bar, peanut butter, or, piece of fruit or something like that. And they always accept it graciously. But giving out money is a completely different thing. So I would rather give somebody food or clothes or a blanket rather than give them a couple bucks.
Money has had its purposes, but I think they're long gone.
Well, it's used now as a tool of...
It's a tool of oppression is what it is.
Right.
That's all it is. It's a tool of oppression.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I have and you don't.
It's also... Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, it's definitely like it's a tool to manipulate the masses. It's like as long as you are... You absolutely are not... Using the word enslaved is too strong of a word, but there's...
No, it's not. No, it's not.
Happening.
That's exactly what they've done. They've created wage slaves. Back when we had slavery, you had to feed and house and clothe those slaves. And instead, now they give us crappy jobs for crappy wages, and we have to feed and clothe and
do everything ourselves.
Shelter ourselves.
Yeah, and that's it right there. As long as you're committing 8 hours of your day, 5 days a week to just making it and getting by, like, what do you have time and energy for other than that?
And then not only that, but you have to give 3 or 4 months a year of your salary to the government.
Yeah, that too,
through taxes.
Yeah,
when they're doing shit that we don't even like. Sorry, Mike.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Maybe now we are getting to the point where, I was saying, maybe we're going to be able to make the things we need and not have to rely on money all the time anymore. And maybe once that happens, there really will be a viable alternative to the capitalistic system. And I think right now there's just the main problem is there's no way to transition off of that makes any sense yet. It's just, people have ideas and, there's these kind of utopian idealists out there that want to change the world and they have kind of an outline of how they would do it. But I think right now when we are operating off this, platform of energies that aren't renewable and, resource-based economies, it's too big of a transition and there's no clear way of how we would even get out of that.
I'll tell you
and
how.
Actually, my friend Greg Carlwood that hosts the Higher Side Chats podcasts said this to me when I was interviewing him, and he said, people will defend capitalism like it's their own child. And I think that's a really great point because there's so many people who still believe that is the best way because they've been indoctrinated into that philosophy their entire life.
Well, if you're not a capitalist, then you're a socialist or a communist, right? It's
right,
still all money-based systems.
It's all about who controls the money and who doesn't have the money. That is all the difference between socialism, communism, and capitalism. And all the other isms is just, what are we going to do with the money? You get rid of the money, you have no more isms. People just get what they need. And then we can create and we can grow. And I'm getting into my utopian.
Yeah, well, that's the utopian version, but a very real thing is who's gonna do the work for getting what they need? Why wouldn't you just suck the tit off of whatever, like some people do already, to get yours, but you're not producing anything for the hive. I mean, there's a lot of
the thing is power needs to not be so centralized. You know, it can't be like we're asking the king for permission to plow the field and get our food and, you know, how much, you know, what's our allotment of clothing for this year. It's like we need to decentralize power to the point where people can make things themselves, or at least within their own communities, so we aren't beholden to any huge central government, you know. And that's directly against the whole ideal of the federal government right now. I mean, they're clearly just grabbing up as much power as they can with stuff like NDAA and as much information as they can through the NSA and PRISM and all of this shit. And it's working against their favor, ironically. They're just doing everything they can to grab on all this power, and it's just making people trust them less and less and less.
We had a situation here in Detroit that happened this week, and there's been an emergency financial manager in place to try and sort through all the craziness with the Detroit economy and with all the corruption and problems with being solvent there, and they're actually filing for bankruptcy. So it's a good opportunity, I think, for Detroit. Me and Toby were talking about this a little bit earlier. It's a good opportunity for them to kind of hit bottom, to start fresh. But the problem is that it'll never be just like a quick, clean death. What they're going to do is they're going to drag it out in litigations for a couple years and appeals and things like that. So the death of Detroit's finances with a bankruptcy isn't just that. It's still going to be subject to toying with it and playing it around. But what are they going to come out with? Like when Henry Ford built the automobile, and when Detroit came up as an automotive giant, you know, this was like the culmination of the Midwest, where, you know, you were living the American dream. You could afford your house with your 1.5 kids and your picket fence house, and you could put food on the table, and you work your 40 hours a week and get your vacations, and that shit's gone, man. I mean, you just don't have that anymore. And even now, so with like the pensions with the city that have been promised to the people that worked hard, you know, and this is going back years and years and years prior to Kwame, and going back all the way to Coleman A. Young, when all the corruption really kind of started here. I just don't see that the American dream is really a legitimate thing anymore. I think it's something that's been put up on a pedestal for a long time. The middle class, I think, is kind of drifting away. And, you know, say what you will about the Occupy movement, but what they have done, I think, is brought to the light the 1% ideal that so many people have just a little chunk. And so you have just a few people that control most of the money. And that's the whole basis behind it. So when does that paradigm get to shift? And I do think it's going to take something radical, whether you're talking about a revolution or a revolt or something like that. But I just, like we're talking about, I just don't think that the gusto is there behind it. I think if more people went out and talked about shit, even instead of just like sweeping under the rug, well, what the fuck are you talking about? You're talking un-American.
Well, what's going to happen is eventually the dollar is going to bust. And when that happens, it's going to be a worldwide calamity. People are already trying to plan for that eventuality. You know, there are people who for years have been having to pay for their oil in dollars, you know, the oil dollar fiasco, that are now making deals amongst themselves to trade in their own currencies. And so people are already trying to get away from the dollar because they know it's about to die. And that's what's going to happen, is the dollar is going to die. And when that happens,
a global collapse,
it's going to be a
point,
global
right?
economic meltdown.
Yeah, destruction.
And so the people who are planning for it now, it's going to lessen the blow a little bit, but it's still going to affect markets supremely for day that it happens, 25 years minimum, it's going to screw things up.
Mm-hmm. That's a scary thought. It's almost like a end of days scenario, because if the finances do collapse, like you're talking about, like a complete collapse, people are going to lose their fucking shit. I mean, it would be easier to explain to the world that the aliens have been visiting us for many, many years than to say, your money's worth nothing.
Yeah.
What would people do?
Yeah.
What would people do? What would you do?
I don't know, man. And
and see, that's the thing.
Be that.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
I was just gonna say, it could be too that in the meanwhile we have this whole technological revolution happening in the background, and have you ever heard of the phrase black swan events before?
Oh yeah.
What is
and,
that exactly?
It's like these kind of technological, these really unexpected technological shifts happen where it kind of just destroys a whole industry. Like the MP3 more or less destroyed the music industry. The personal computer more or less destroyed the large computing industry. And these were like multi-billion-dollar, million-dollar companies that just had no clue what was coming. And in a lot of ways, I think that's what's going to happen to the government and the economy in general. I think technology is going to outgrow the need for any of that. And I think they're just not going to know what to do. And I think their influence is going to slowly die, and they're going to eventually implode on themselves because of that.
Well, in the book, The Black Swan, Nicholas Talbot makes a couple of great suggestions about how to handle these things. And so for people who don't know what a black swan is, for many years, people thought that swans only came in one color, and that was white. And they didn't think that, many things could happen. They go to Australia, and lo and behold, there's a black swan. And so it's a paradigm changing, event that happens. Everybody tends to believe that today's going to be mostly like yesterday and tomorrow's going to be mostly like today. Well, black swan events are things that come along and just
flip shit upside down.
Yeah, screw up reality. And so
Nicely explained.
That's what's going to happen. And I don't have time to go into everything that Taub does, and some of his explanations get a little technical, and I would highly recommend anybody to read the book and check it out. But there are things that we can do in front of these events, but we're so stuck in our current paradigm that it's going to be painful no matter what we do. We're not flexible, and that's one of the things that Taub stresses, that you have to be flexible. You have to be realistic, and if you're not, then it's going to be even more painful. And when the dollar busts, even irrespective of when the technological revolution happens or the next one happens, there's going to be so much chaos, confusion, frustration that happen. I'm hoping that it's minimal, but you get a lot of people in one area that don't have access to food and water they used to. They're going to try to find it somewhere, and they'll go
to great lengths to do that.
Yeah. And if it comes down to them starving or you starving or them living and you dying, guess who they're going to be voting for? So that's what I'm concerned with in the next, 5 years ish. And it could happen sooner. It could take a little bit longer. It just depends on how long the world tolerates us devaluing the dollar that everybody has to play with.
Well, I think people largely globally look at us like,
you fat American pig.
I posted this thing on the London Reelers Facebook group, and it was like a meme kind of. The top of it was like this American who was hanging from like a soaring eagle on its claws and saying, "Fuck yeah, I'm fucking American." And then you had another guy underneath him. He's like an English dude sitting in a wingback chair with a scotch and a monocle, and it's like pip pip and all that, right? So I think the globe usually has this perspective on Americans, like this, they're fat, they're lazy,
we don't care about anybody else.
Yeah, we don't really give a shit about everybody else, even though we say we do.
We're cowboys.
They look at us almost as imperialistic, and that's kind of what we are. I mean, how many fucking military bases do we have? Over 300 or something globally. I mean, isn't that an empire when you look at it?
Anytime you have troops stationed outside of your own country, you can technically be called an imperialist. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a semantical argument against it at best. I mean, you can create a narrative like, "Oh no, we're there for your protection, we're there for your own good," but it's semantics at
It's
best. for
regional
sure.
stabilization.
Yeah, right.
Right?
More like
Exactly.
destabilization.
Yeah.
How's that going in Afghanistan, guys?
Yeah, no
Real
shit.
fucking nice. Sorry for anybody in the military who's listening, but it's just I just see through a lot of the bullshit out there, and I wish more people were concerned with it. And by doing, dropping podcasts like this, and I've already had, some of my friends that have listened to this and like, I didn't even realize some of this shit was going on. They had no idea what NDAA was, or how psychedelics would affect somebody. We had a pretty good response on our last podcast. It was with Brad Birch on the Multidisciplinary Association with Psychedelic Studies. We were talking about how psychedelics can alter people and shift that paradigm that people have in their minds. So maybe we just need to get a bunch of our world leaders together and take some ayahuasca or take a mushroom trip or something, and maybe that'll sort some things out. I highly doubt it, but I don't have all the solutions. I just have I can point out discretions that are happening where I see injustices, and hopefully somebody smarter than me can figure shit out.
Yeah, I think all we can do is, kind of continue that discourse and talk about the subjects that are not being talked about in the mainstream. I mean, there's nothing else you can really do. What's the alternative? You can either be totally take no action and have no agency, or you can talk a bunch of shit. And I think talking a bunch of shit is better.
Yeah, but even by taking no action, you're speaking.
You're saying that it's okay.
Yeah, you're saying
you're
it's
basically
fine, yeah.
saying it's okay. By taking no action, you're saying, you know what, I'm willing to live with this.
Loud. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people genuinely are ignorant, and I mean ignorant by the real fact that they're not
informed.
Fucking idiots. They're just uninformed of the situation, and they don't understand what the repercussions of things like this are. So, I'm pretty outspoken now, especially since I started the podcast. I used to kind of stay off the grid a lot, but I'm a lot more outspoken about things, and I get a lot of cross-eyed looks and things like that. But I'm at the point now where I really just don't give a shit. The older I get, the less I care about people's opinion on me. Do I like to be liked? Yeah. Do I like people to enjoy and agree with my opinion? Sure. But that's not always the case. And a lot of times I have to agree to disagree. I'm not going to get in a fist fight from somebody about
kind of like
disagreeing with things.
Yeah, kind of like you were saying, Mike. I mean, you're either acting or you're being acted upon. You're either an agent for yourself or you're a victim of everything else. And, it's kind of the American way to say, you know what? Screw you guys. I'm not going to put up with this anymore. But the problem is we've kind of lost that attitude. The spirit of 76 is kind of, the spirit of 69 now. And it's like, let's get high.
The spirit of 76 is now considered terrorist.
I know, right? Like, come on.
Yeah, and it's also really sad when the traditional way to speak your mind has been made null and void. I mean, like, a vote is a total illusion at this point. Like, you're voting for corporations no matter what you do at this point. There is no, the two-party system is a complete joke. I mean, the exact same agendas have pretty much been pushed forward between the last two administrations, say for some, social issues, which obviously I come down more on the side of let everyone do whatever makes them happy. But, when it comes to the stuff that's like really, really important, when it comes to stuff like, energy consumption and, what's going on with fiat currency and what's going on overseas with our wars. And, none of that stuff is changing. We're operating off the exact same operating system here.
Well, I've said it before, and I'll say it now, is the really only power that you have is you might think you have power when you go to the voting station and things like that, but I'm totally disillusioned by that anymore. And the only real power you have is with your pocketbook. So when you go to the store, you're making decisions that are funding corporations that are funding our government, basically. So if you're going to buy GMO foods, you're funding Monsanto indirectly, or actually directly.
Yeah.
And if you're going organic, you're funding something completely different. So, and say what you will about the organic movement or whatnot, but it can go for everything. The fuel that you're buying, the food that you're putting in your system, the companies that the retail centers that you're shopping. Are you shopping at Walmart? Or are you shopping at a local store? Are you buying locally? There's all kinds of different issues that can get you out of that paradigm. But I really look at it as every time I use $1, I'm voting for something. So take that for what it's worth, people.
Yeah, that's a good point, man, for sure.
I think that we should probably wrap it up about now. We've been chatting for quite a bit here. Mike,
yeah, man, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad you came on, man. This was cool.
Yeah, let's do it again.
Cool, man. What kind of future projects do you have upcoming? I know the band's got a couple things going on. You got any future guests you want to talk about for the podcast lined up, or what you got happening in the future here?
Yeah, ironically, I'm going to be talking with Matt Staggs again soon too. I just kind of dropped him a message the other day. I think you guys and me are operating on a similar wavelength here, because that kind of happened with Aubrey too. You guys were talking to him around the same time I was.
Yeah, I'm hoping to get him.
So I'll be talking to Matt again soon. I've got a guy coming on who is making a really, really awesome game. Actually, he's a programmer that works with Grant, who hosted my last cast with me, and Grant turned me on to him. And this guy's doing this unbelievable project called Pisces. And I'll be putting links up to that pretty soon, so everybody can check that out. But we'll be talking to the programmer of that game. And I'm just really busy, man, between the podcast, the band, working, having a significant other. I'm busy, man.
Yeah.
I have a lot going on all the time.
I think that's for all of us here.
Yeah, I feel you. I feel your pain.
It's been a busy summer. Yeah, and this is we're kind of breaking the IGC hiatus here. I don't think I've dropped the podcast in about a month. So if you guys are waiting impatiently, sorry about that. I've got a bunch lined up. I've got one a week, then I'll be recording for the next month at least. Got some cool guests coming up, so stay tuned on that stuff. So give us your site. Give us where we can find your podcast and all that.
Yeah. MidwestReal.net. You can listen to everything there. You can subscribe on iTunes. It's on Stitcher, all that jazz. You can follow us on Twitter at MidwestReal. We're on Facebook. Give us a like. We don't really do enough with our Facebook page, so come support us over there. As far as City of Ghosts, you can check City of Ghosts out on Facebook, on Twitter. cityofghostband.bandcamp.com. You can listen to that EP. And we'll be doing a lot with that coming up. So if you're into music, check that out.
Cool. Your guys' homework this week is to get out there and do something creative, however small it might be. Bring out your creative side a little bit. It seems to bring happiness to many people. So whatever you're doing out there, just take a couple moments of your day and try and be creative about something. Where you can find the Intellectual Gentlemen's Club is intellectualgentlemensclub.com. We have the blog up there that I posted. I've been neglecting lately, but all the podcasts are posted up on there. We have direct download links. We have a link to iTunes, a link to Stitcher. We are on Twitter at IGCcast. We also have a Facebook page, Facebook.com/whatever, Intellectual Gentlemen's Club. Like I said, we have that donate button for PayPal. We have the affiliate links on there for Onnit and Amazon. Please subscribe to the podcast. Share it out if you liked it. Check out our archives. We have Mike and I both have an eclectic blend of people that we've talked to, and some interesting conversations. Yeah. So yeah, just get on there and converse with us a little bit. If you didn't like something that you heard on the podcast, let's talk about that as well. So we can agree to disagree. It doesn't have to get ugly. See you guys next time. Mike, thanks again for joining us. Toby, thanks for coming back.
Guys.
I love a piece of chicken grease.
All right, guys, hang loose out there.